Today, a small island carrying the weight of a war.
If Iran chooses poorly, then they will have a blockade and bombs dropping on infrastructure, power, and energy.
With the U.S. saying it's ready to restart combat if Iran doesn't agree to a deal, what could that mean for the people of Kharg Island? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Hey there. As you're watching today's episode, leave us a comment letting us know what you think and what stories you want us to do next. And if you're listening on a podcast app, leave us a review. It helps other people find the show.
My name is Seamus Malekafzali. I'm a journalist and writer based in New York City, and I am the co-host of the Turbulence podcast with Dylan Saba.
Seamus, welcome to The Take. It's good to have you. I've followed your work for a long time now, and I'm excited to get into this with you, especially because today you are taking us to Kharg Island in Iran, a place the administration of U.S. President Donald Trump has previously bragged about obliterating. What should we know about Kharg Island?
Kharg Island is an island off the coast of Kuwait, nearer to the coast of Kuwait and Iraq, that is owned and administered by the Islamic Republic of Iran. The estimates range from about 8,000 to about 20,000 people live on the island, most of whom are in the oil industry. Kharg, it handles about 80 to 90% of Iran's oil exports, and it is very, very important to the Iranian economy.
Okay, so this island has been part of this two-stage pressure campaign in the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. First, to threaten or strike the source of Iran's oil exports. And as you said, Kharg is its main oil export terminal. And then also to choke the routes that move the oil. We're speaking on Thursday morning, Eastern Time. And as of this moment, the U.S. is telling Iran it is willing to negotiate, but there's a but. It's also enforcing this naval blockade of Iran's ports in the Strait of Hormuz, so a blockade of the blockade. What do we know about how that's going, how it's actually hitting Iran?
Well, I mean, the immediate economic effects of this blockade aren't super clear yet. It has only been in force for, I think, about 2 days at this point. CENTCOM is claiming that there is no naval traffic going out from Iranian ports, that 96% of Iranian trade is done by the sea. Therefore, the effects of this are going to be immediate. The Iranian media has been saying that, of course, necessary food supplies are stockpiled, that there is not going to be any major ramifications regarding this for months. That remains to be seen. But right now, several oil tankers have apparently been able to transit the Strait of Hormuz just fine. Though I cannot imagine that the way that Iran has been going about this before, where they were able to export even more oil during this war than before, I don't think that is going to be the case for very much longer, regardless if the blockade is complete or incomplete or whatever.
The irony, though, is, of course, we're in the middle of a fragile ceasefire, right? And the U.S. has said just today, the Secretary Pete Hegseth said the U.S. is ready to restart combat if Iran does not agree to a deal.
We are locked and loaded on your critical dual-use infrastructure, on your remaining power generation, and on your energy industry.
And so this blockade is a way to pressure them into reaching a deal with the U.S. But is it also a violation of the ceasefire? What do we know?
Well, it's not immediately clear what the ceasefire is even supposed to be. All of this talk about proposals and the basis of talks was conducted without anything being specifically on paper. And the Iranian military said that this was a precursor to a violation of the ceasefire. If CENTCOM, if the American military decides to maybe fire on Iranian ships or try to seize Iranian ships, to say nothing of the other ships that they've threatened to interdict, who have simply paid tolls to the Iranian government to pass through the strait safely. That may become something, but for now, as long as Iran itself or Iranian interests are not being bombarded by the U.S. military, I don't think Iran will consider it enough to completely tear up the ceasefire. No.
Hmm. Okay, so then let's zoom back onto some of the people who might be most affected if the ceasefire was to be torn up. Let's go back to Kharg Island, which has been attacked twice now by the U.S., and Donald Trump has threatened to take it over. Why has the U.S. had its sights on this island in particular, and what would happen to Iran if it was seized?
Well, Kharg has been in American sights for a very long time before this war as part of any inevitable war plan with Iran. The idea being that if you easily seize this island, the vast majority of Iran's ability to export oil is taken out in a single swoop, and any capitulation would be very, very near incoming. I have a feeling that they are no longer prioritizing Kharg in the way that they were before, mainly because of the threat posed by, not just the issue of occupying another island, simply even a small part of Iranian territory, but what kind of fire American soldiers would have to deal with from the mainland, from defenses on the island. I think that's why they prioritized blocking the Strait of Hormuz, that blockade itself.
There are also other islands in this strait as well. Are they as strategic?
Somewhat. Not as strategically important to the United States. There had been chatter about potentially seizing Lorak Island, which has a slightly smaller population than Kharg, which is where most of these tolls have been collected. There has been talk about maybe seizing Hormuz Island or Qashm Island, which has hundreds of thousands of people on it, alongside a couple of Iranian military installations. Any of these, though, they still have the same exposure risks to the American military, to say nothing of the issue of civilian occupation and the dangers and the, not just the dangers, but the immorality of that, I would argue.
So, Seamus, I heard some reassuring analysis from you there in which you said it looks like that Kharg Island is no longer, paraphrasing here, but it may be not a point of contention at this moment. But for the people that live and work there, I wonder if that is enough reassurance, right? Because we know there's about 8,000 to 20,000 people who live on the island, who work and go to the island for work in the oil industry. Who are they? And what was life like there prior to this state of conflict?
Well, Kharg was never a tourist island like other islands of the Persian Gulf, like Kish, for instance, which is a major tourist hotspot. As I said before, most of these people work in the oil industry, and most of them live in the single city on the island, Kharg itself. It had been a major trading post for most of its history, and now it has become this extraordinarily important piece of the Iranian economy. I think how strange this whole process became very evident when Kharg was bombed for the very first time. And a lot of these residents, when they were interviewed by BBC Persian, they said, where are these military installations that the U.S. military is bombing? Because they're right inside this city, which is very normally peaceful and does not have a dedicated military base. What it has is, of course, the city and a civilian airport, which was then bombarded and made it so escape from the island, as many people would probably be inclined to do, was cut off. To the degree that that's been repaired, I'm not sure at this point.
Seamus, this raises a question for me in that we talk about the people who are questioning where these military installations are, right? But something you point out in a piece that you did for Truth Out is that if you watch most U.S. media coverage, you would think that this is an uninhabited piece of land that we're talking about. And there are also hundreds of thousands of other people who live along Iran's Gulf Coast and inhabit islands in Iranian territorial waters. Why do you think it is that these residents, these people, have been missing from these stories?
Well, the Iranian civilian populace, it can be invoked as something to fight a war over, but it can never actually be treated as a real thing. Because then when they're killed, when they're massacred, that it inevitably raises questions that the American public and the American government especially is not prepared to deal with. The war that they are trying to wage is one where no Americans are killed, because that exposes too many things. It raises too many specters of quagmires that we have been involved in before. But also, no civilian ever has to die. Everyone who is killed is either a government agent or some sort of IRGC commander, and that has resulted in Kharg going from being this place that is important to the oil industry. And because the oil industry is inevitably so critical to the Iranian government and therefore the IRGC, which is a designated terrorist organization, that everyone on this island is somehow within the IRGC network and therefore their blood is forfeit. You saw it in more of a, I don't know what you call it, more of a sanitized way. Maybe that's the best word for it. On places like CBS, where they brought in people saying, well, there's no real civilian center on the island.
It's a dozen plus miles off the coast of Iran. It can be isolated. There's no civilian population center there. It really is just oil infrastructure, and until recently, the military means to guard it.
So it'd be no matter if you just tried to corner it, if you tried to blockade it. But certain other people on channels that were more aligned with Donald Trump, places like Fox News, there were no civilians. Apparently, everything is closed off. It's a full-scale military center, and therefore it's not just not a danger to Americans, it's actually imperative to the military endeavor that is being undertaken here to take Kharg and to destroy everything on the island.
Well, this sort of answers my question, but I wonder if you can elaborate on what the risks are to civilians when their home is treated as a piece of infrastructure and not a place where actual human beings live.
Well, we've been very lucky so far that, at least from what what the Iranian media has been saying, that there haven't been any civilian casualties just yet on Kharg, but buildings have been destroyed on that island. And in other places inside Iran where no distinction has been made about military and civilian infrastructure, you saw the massacres that happened at Minab and at the volleyball hall elsewhere in the country on that same day, apartment buildings that get leveled without any sort of consideration. There is massive risk, and no one that I could detect in the American media, whether they were civilian analysts or former military officials, none of them seemed to have any sort of consideration for this. The one piece that I saw that really took this into account was a former NATO commander saying that the population needed to be controlled, that they could preserve their safety essentially by just locking them in their homes by a military force. Everything is deeply, deeply risky to the population because they are being considered as a singular entity, either to be controlled or literally killed.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about an island of 8,000 people, but it feels like this is telling a bigger story about how this war is being fought. What is that story?
I mean, this is an extension, I think, of how the war in Gaza was fought and how the war in Lebanon was fought and is being fought right now. There are no, I think, exterminationist plans for Iran in the same way that Israel has them for Gaza and for southern Lebanon at the very least. But it is being fought very much as Israel would like it to be. That means everything is up for destruction in ways that would never have been, I think, considered so openly before. the threatened destruction of power plants, the double tap strikes on bridges, full-blown threatening of destruction of civilization, talking about these islands in particular as being obliterated without any sort of consideration for who lives there or even trying to make the distinction, even in rhetoric. As I said before, everything is on the table. Everything is up for grabs. And the line between civilian and military is not just obscured, but it's been completely destroyed, with no consideration made whatsoever.
Well, Seamus, Pakistani officials who are acting as mediators here are expecting, they say, a major breakthrough in talks between Iran and the United States. And I'm wondering if that gives you hope. What are you expecting might happen next?
I still have very limited hopes for where these ceasefire negotiations come in Pakistan, even if there is a temporary extension to that ceasefire to allow for more talks. The general trend, when Iranian negotiators come to the table with the Americans, is that when they give an inch, the Americans take a mile. When they spoke with the same team, essentially, when they spoke with Witkoff last year, they offered up 3 years of a pause on nuclear enrichment, though it would still require a lot of political considerations to be made domestically. But when Witkoff heard that, he still demanded 5, and then he came back and he demanded more years. And then the talks completely failed from there. And now that the Iranians are apparently offering up 5 years of enrichment halting, Vance is saying that they are demanding 20 years. And there is no evidence that I can detect, even though the Iranians and the Americans are both saying that there are substantive discussions, that they are really any closer to bridging that fundamental gap between their dual demands.
You have intertwining identities that bring you even closer to the story than just your journalism hat. And I wonder if you could tell us about that and how it connects you to what you're reporting on.
Look, I grew up Iranian and Irish. I had the notion of anti-imperialism very present as I grew up, talking about war, the threat of war. And I lived in Lebanon for a time as well. I had the great honor of being able to live in Beirut from 2023 to 2024. And I remember living there in particular and seeing all of this coverage of the city that I was living in, the country that I was living in, how Beirut and the southern suburbs were spoken about as dehumanized military strongholds, singularly as such. And I am very aware of the consequences of talking about inhabited places as if they are uninhabited. Maybe not out of malice, but simply out of journalistic shorthand. That creates an environment where Israel, where the United States don't have to think about that either. And I think it is imperative for other people, not just journalists, to remember these things, that these are cities, that these are towns, that these are inhabited places where people live and where they want to continue living. And when you decide to simplify all of that to strategic objectives, then you lose that critical element that you were talking about people. And that gives other people room to maneuver, and to maneuver in very malicious ways.
Yeah. Well, Seamus, thank you for helping us to remember. I appreciate it.
Thank you.